Welcome to Digication Scholars Conversations. I'm your host, Jeff Yan. In this episode, you will hear part 2 of my conversation with John Regan from Boston University. More links and information about today's conversation can be found on Digication's Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Full episodes of Digication Scholars Conversations can be found on YouTube or your favorite podcast app.
You are about to hear part 2 of our conversation with John Regan from Boston University. Please be sure to listen to our previous episode to hear part 1 of this conversation.
Clearly, the lack of diversity today in many higher education institutions has problems, and students are recognizing it now. So, since you work closely with a lot of the students, sort of in the front line, you are working
Yeah.
with them, you are seeing their reaction, you're seeing how they learn. How do you feel that students in the last, I don't know, maybe a couple years, a few years, how they might have been different from perhaps the last generation of students? Because I feel like that when I talk to Natalie, when I talk to other folks, everyone's seeing some kind of change in the tides. They themselves seems to be more demanding of the diversity itself. They themselves are a little bit more. They hold themselves to a certain standard in terms of mission and purpose in life and doing good and so on. I in fact talked to yesterday with someone who's I thought was really incredible. She's I think she's a director of the career services at a school in New York, and she was telling me that today her students are not holding getting a job at Facebook as a badge of honor. It was, but it's not today because of the way that Facebook
Yes.
has what they've done, and what the type of things that they've done. And we were starting to talk about, wow, it's almost like seeing a certain kind of history repeating itself. Like it's not cool to be an executive at a tobacco company. Like your
Right.
parents don't
Right.
tell people, oh yeah, my
Yeah.
son or my daughter is a VP at a tobacco company. So it's really
Yeah.
interesting because there's almost like a breaking point, and I don't know whether we're there yet, but there is sort of a deep sense of justice that
Yeah.
goes a little bit beyond sort of the last generation of folks, where you can always justify, I need to make a living or I need to make ends meet, that therefore I do this. It's just business, kind of thing.
Yeah.
What do you
No,
think?
I
Yeah.
totally concur. I mean, I think it's been the same time period this last few years.
Mhm.
uh, the students. I have, for instance, I had a student on one of my evaluations thank me for diversifying the curriculum or giving a reading from a Hispanic writer. I never had that before.
Mhm. Right.
And then also too, you're so right about this. My son is a junior and he's in data science, and he was looking for internships. And I think I mentioned Facebook, and he rolled his eyes like, "Dad, you don't get it." Oh, okay. And 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 I talk to other students as well. I think they really want to do something with their lives that's meaningful.
Mhm.
And I think the difference may be if we go back to maybe, I don't know, previous generations, maybe my generation, who want to be do-gooders. These folks they've thought about it more deeply, a little bit more pragmatically, and I have a feeling they're going to just be more successful. I
Mhm.
think this.
Yeah.
I have great hope for our current students, and so then we get into why. Okay, and I remember back in 2008 when we had the stock market crash and all
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
And again, at Boston University, I love our students from all over the globe, but given that it is a private institution, we do have a lot of students who are well off. Um, but I will tell you, after 2008, 2009, 2010, students just those years seemed especially nice. And I don't know if it was then, if someone did lose their job or they knew of somebody that some hardship made them not take their lives is much the privilege of their lives is much for granted.
Mm.
So if we go to this group now, I do wonder about the pandemic and its impact. I know for medical school admissions, they talked about how there was the Fauci effect that so many people, I
Mhm.
guess they had 20% more applications, and from people who originally, were in like marketing or
Yep.
something like that. So I do wonder if the pandemic uh, was I don't think it was the total cause, but I wonder if it was an accelerant in this situation.
And I've heard similar numbers, by the way. And actually, there is a um, more than one public health programs that really this last year have highlighted the importance of what they do, and how people can make a difference. And like you were saying, someone who was in marketing might go in public health, really being able to say, I am actually doing the kind of marketing work, except I'm doing it for a really specific purpose, and is a very important purpose. So
Yeah,
instead of
yeah,
going to work for Procter and Gamble, or or
right,
Nike, which is cool,
yeah,
to be able to work for whatever LeBron's next basketball shoes, right? It might be for them now. They're like, it's even cooler to be able to spread the messages that might save millions of lives.
yeah.
Um,
It's
yeah.
interesting you mentioned Nike because I seem to remember this from about a year ago. A conversation. I think it was online. Somebody sent it out, and it was somebody who got a job at Nike, and they were teased by their friends
Hmm.
for working for just a profit, and they said, no, I'm working for like a charitable wing of them, the one thing that does their community outreach. And then they were like, yeah,
Yeah.
so maybe, maybe the workers and what workers are interested in could help push these corporations to be more socially responsible.
Right. There's a potential for things to work from within, and I guess that was what happened. Sort of what happened with Facebook, except
Right,
that
right,
the
yeah,
person got sort of shut down, and now she had to be a whistleblower. But
yeah,
that's a whole mess in and
yeah,
of itself. And I do think that that's a little bit sad, though, because to me, that spells the end of Facebook doing any more studies. Um, you know, because
yeah,
that has the potential of, it's almost like the advantage of being, um, they don't want to become liable, right? Almost like if you did a
right,
study, then you become liable. Um, let's shift gear for a little bit on one of the things that I think Natalie and I talked about is, we talked about, sort of the current state of students and mental health.
oh yes,
It's of course, a very real and serious issue that, in many ways, to me, it's one of those issues that we can't put off. We can't afford to do it. It's there already. um, we are already sort of late in trying to address it. How do you see that with your students? Because as a someone who's working in a classroom with the students,
hmm.
sort of on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis, what do you see?
Well, first off, I just want to say you are so right about us being late. And I just want to say when I started my career like 30 something years ago, I was going for a master's degree and I was put in a first year classroom uh, to teach, and really just had minimal minimal supervision. And the first round of papers I got, I had a student who talked about how her foster parent had beaten her, and that's why she had
Mm,
certain scars on her face.
mm,
And I was totally ill-equipped to handle that. And I didn't go through, and at least I had enough sense not to like circle commas places and just like that. And I had an individual talk with her, but I so look back on that and think, what, I needed help. I mean, I needed to have some uh, um, have some training. And what's great about BU is we have a Terriers Connect training that's terrific. I went to it a few years ago, and they're going to bring it back. And they talk about all, the procedures, how to talk to students, how to get them, guide them to the resources available on campus. What are some of the signs? And I mean, just amazing. And I really think before anyone goes in a classroom, they need at minimum that degree of training.
Mhm.
Um, One thing during the pandemic that I noticed was that students really, you know, last year, 2020, students I think in March we were meeting on campus. Then they went back to their homes, and then through the lockdown, what they missed more than anything was that sense of student community. And when BU came back in this past September, or excuse me, when they came back after that, and you could be on campus, I know so many number of students who rarely went to class because they could still do the class online.
Mhm.
And you might say, why are they there? It's because that they missed that sense of community.
Mhm.
And so I really think during the pandemic, what I tried to focus on was that sense of community building. And there's a terrific book by Gretchen McCullough, Because Internet. And I teach that book. There it is there. I don't get any royalties there, but great book. And what she talks about, students love the book because she's kind of defending their use of the internet. Students get beaten up, you're online too much, it's rotting
Mhm.
your brain. But she talks about how it's really, teens are not addicted to social media, they're addicted to each other and that sense of community. And so what I did was I had the students in groups of 3 or 4, and we gave them questions from all our courses, from rhetoric, humanities, social science, and they would have a weekly 30 to 40-minute conversation around those questions with each other, and they would record it on Zoom and then post it on a special Digication ePortfolio. And we faculty would go in, listen to them, make a few comments here and there.
Mhm.
But what was remarkable, and I talked to students afterwards, was that so many of them stayed well beyond the questions. And would just turn off the recording, but then talk and get together, and it really opened my eyes to. And again, I think always in the past, I don't feel as if I didn't create a sense of a good community. I did to a degree, but now I realize that's so imperative. And that's why the podcast with Michael Yarborough and the community that he created
Mhm.
with his students,
It was
uh,
amazing. Yeah.
that was amazing. So
Mhm. Yeah. It almost feels, um, and I remember talking to a couple of students, and they basically said, of course, I have my family, my blood relatives, my parents, etc., my siblings, etc., at home, that whom we are working with. But this family that they built in this community
yeah,
serves as the second family where they can talk
yeah,
about things that they actually couldn't talk about with their real family,
yeah,
and they support each other in that way. And I thought that was really amazing, and to a high degree, I think that this is the kind of experience that make higher education such a precious and important, and maybe it's not for absolutely everyone, but I think that for a lot of people who are discrediting
mm,
higher education, or its usefulness, um, it's something that you need to think a lot about, because it's not about just having read all those books that is in your syllabus. It's about all these other experiences that come with
right,
it, especially during these years, of uh, especially during those typical age, college age students. I mean, the human brain doesn't get fully sort of formed and functional until 26, and in my case, probably a lot later.
right, me too.
But it's such an important, holistic way of thinking about the growth of someone and having these experiences. Like the students organizing themselves to support each other. That doesn't come from a book. you
Right,
know it doesn't come from a planned exercise. You kind of have to They have to, it kind of has to happen, and they have to organize, and they have to do it.
yeah,
And people that that go through that experience, even though you're not the organizer, you still experience that. And guess what? Those experiences going to what brings you into the leaders of,
Yeah.
by the time you get into the workforce and later on in your career. That's
Yeah.
the lessons that you're going to draw from.
No,
Um,
I totally agree. And I know in 2020 there was a lot of, Cassandra calls about residential education. Oh, we can just do it online. Let's do it
yeah,
online cheaper. And I have a friend of mine who's in corporate world, and he was telling me, all my friends are saying, oh, we're gonna just send our kids online to school,
right,
and
right,
then they don't.
yeah,
He's doing the college tours like everyone else, or like so many others. And yes, college may not be for everybody, but I think education is for everybody.
yeah,
And I think that we um, just need to provide, the one thing that's good about the American system is you do have a lot of entry points. I know some other countries, once you kind of fall off the testing, things seem a little more limited. Here, we do have a lot of entry
yeah,
points. We just need to buffer those up,
yeah.
much more funding for community colleges. And Jeff, shout out to you. So many of the faculty from community colleges are amazing. Their stories I was listening to on the podcast, and it's really, really remarkable. And I mean, community colleges just need so much more attention and funding as well. What is it like? One out of every 12 college students in the United States goes to a California community college. I mean,
Yeah, it's a huge population,
it's
and
huge.
it's a it's a very vital part, I think, of our education system. um, and it might also, in my very limited view, um, it might actually be the system that saves the other colleges.
Right,
It may be one of those system where, without the community college sort of model, we might see a huge drop of people that can finish a 4 year degree because they don't have a 2 year degree that they can do in a more flexible environment, in a more
right.
less expensive environment, and so on. um, I do think that, the one of the problems I see really is that people sometimes almost attack higher education and saying how it's not useful, and they kind of come up with reasons, examples of why that's the case, because such and such college spend their money on building a lazy river, and
Right.
how is that tuition money going into real use? um, but then they also don't see that college is also spending money on getting mental health support that you won't get if you go to your whatever brand of online boot camp today, right?
Right, right.
So I think that there is some aspect of what colleges do that are irresponsible, and I think that we talked a little bit about before. The football coach, like
Yeah.
sort of expenses versus the money that goes into incredibly important and good use. So I think that there is a certain amount of critique that I would have about colleges and how, what they're doing. Some of
You're
it
right.
is
No,
about
I
not
agree.
being transparent, and so people just have this opaque box that, hey, this is a really nice college and all, but is that just basically my tuition goes into lining John's pocket, and I don't think it does.
No.
uh, Although if it but it's kind of more like it's really more like it's almost like the conversation isn't really even hitting the nail on the head. They're
Right.
hitting somewhere else other than the nail that is on the head.
Right.
It's
Right.
and so it's a very confusing environment, and I hope that it becomes clarified over time as people get a little bit more knowledgeable about how the functions of the colleges and how they really contribute to the growth of students that go through them.
Yeah, Jeff, I think you raise a really great point about clarification. And I remember about 10 years ago, the University of Maryland, I saw like their spreadsheet for expenses,
Hmm.
and it was really interesting. I never realized that they pay, like the college would pay so much for heat and utilities.
Hmm. Yep.
And I think that if things, and you had mentioned transparency, if we got to see what the books were,
Mhm.
it Zoom bomb by cat. Um, we might. I think colleges may fear, oh my God, they'll realize they're spending on this and that. It could be the opposite effect. Like, okay, granted, and then people who are critics might be like, yeah, we still critics, and I have some issues myself. Uh, but some of these other expenses are understandable,
Yep.
and it makes you realize that you do there yeah, again, like for instance, fair wage. I mean,
Yep.
and there's many unions operating at colleges that are doing great work, and they are going for a fair wage, and of course that has to come from somewhere. So yeah, I do. I've always thought if colleges were more transparent, they think they'd get all this flack, but I actually think it might be a little bit the opposite. But that's just my
I think you're absolutely right, and I think that there are probably colleges who are thinking, like, and here is what I would say is that even the most perfect colleges have pockets of inefficiency. There are
yeah,
pockets, areas where they go, actually, we're not that proud of spending money on this thing that didn't work. And they're
right,
so scared to expose that they are also now hiding the good things that they're doing.
yeah,
And
that's a
I
good way
think
to
that
put it.
that's
Yeah,
a probably over time everyone will realize that this is a mistake,
yeah,
because like, I do think that they generally speaking do more good than they do harm, or they do
right, right. No,
smarter things
I
than they do
no,
the silly mistakes, because
right,
everyone makes a mistake. I'm not suggesting that they shouldn't. Every
yeah,
corporation, every entity does, especially when you go to a certain size. It's
right,
hard to make sure that your thousands of employees, every single one is, pulling, 100% of their weight. But
right,
realize that the general direction is actually really rather important, and that, that's quite important, and as opposed to just sort of throwing out everything, and then, claiming that you're disrupting the higher education, except that
right,
you just don't understand it.
right, right.
So, maybe the very last thing I wanted to ask you, given that you are such a hands-on practitioner, having gone through that yourself, and this is going to be a question sort of really probably more geared towards folks who might be listening, who are faculty members similar to you, who are, who work with students on a day-to-day basis, but may not have taken the plunge on, doing some of the more experimental things that you've done in the last, decade. I know that at this point you don't think of them experimental. You think of them as foundational and fundamental to what you do. But I would also imagine that as the director of ePortfolios, working with all the different kind of faculty members that come your way,
Mhm.
you have
Oh yeah.
experience working with folks that doesn't, at least initially, share those experience because they don't haven't had it. Do you have any sort of quick tips or tricks that allows people to sort of get started? Well, do you have any recommendations, anything like that?
Well, I think one recommendation is start small. I think whenever if you want to experiment with it, I know so often faculty members, you know, I, if it's an assignment I've done for a while and I know how to assess and grade it, I feel pretty confident in that. But when I bring in something new, I have to admit I go easy on those. So sometimes I'll make those smaller, like do it at a smaller scale
Mhm.
and then bring it up. So my pretty developed assignment, which is 30% of the course, originally started as a little 5% germ, a little seedling,
Right, right.
and then moved up that way. Because I think that you know um, you may not you may want to start small, and again that goes for ePortfolio use as well, and we do have faculty that are resistant to it.
Mm,
What I try and do is just emphasize at the bare minimum, can you get students to post one or two major assignments so that our assessment committee can take a look at it. And I know with our assessment, how we do assessment is we use the student ePortfolios, and we assess them by a committee. We have an assessment committee rather than having all faculty do the grading, and then give faculty a rubric and do an assessment of
Mhm,
every student.
mhm,
And that's a lot of work. And I know there's a lot of faculty resistance at other colleges because all faculty you figure I have to grade and do a full assessment.
mhm,
That frankly would not work with our faculty. So we do try and you know uh, make it less onerous on those. And really, could anything be simpler than just tell your students to post one or two um,
mhm.
things on their ePortfolios, and they don't need to create a separate ePortfolio because students have one ePortfolio for their entire 2 years in our program.
They already created it somewhere else,
Right.
possibly.
They already created it. And for some students, again, those that are really just, have bought into metacognition and reflection, they go in and see the different assignments for the different, and they start to maybe just
Mhm,
by the fact that it's there,
mhm,
in one spot, start to maybe think of some crossover
mhm,
ideas. That's one thing if I had to go back in time for how I've handled ePortfolio and assessment at our college, I think I would really try and push to to do more. Try and look for students who had examples of that crossover,
mhm,
and push more in that area. But that
mhm,
said, we have our science program in the sophomore year
mhm,
does some amazing things with the ePortfolio.
mhm.
Which is really good for capturing multimodal learning.
Right.
Um,
And let me ask you about that assessment. I knew that I said it was going to be a last question, but you just brought up assessment. I want to ask about this. Having been doing assessment for, using portfolios for a while now, do you have any sort of general observations about assessing work that is in the format of a portfolio versus assessing work which is more typical in many other places where they're just collecting essentially the word documents that students submit as a paper, let's say, and they just get like hundreds of papers
yeah.
versus seeing hundreds of portfolios, or thousands of them. What do you think are the main differences, and is it worth doing it in a portfolio?
Well, I mean, I think so because it's just kind of, if you will, on the root level, one stop shopping. You know, I can access an ePortfolio at any time. My committee can. We can go in and see it. All the documents are in the same place for all of our courses. So, I mean, I think collecting, in a sense, the collection part's already done. Whereas the method you talked about, there would need to be some mechanism for collection, which would take, I imagine, certain woman hours to do or man hours to do. Uh, that eh, so 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 that I think is, I mean, just that idea of convenience. One thing I like about our ePortfolios too is that I tell students to put up a welcome message so that you'll see a picture of them and kind of their a little quick bio and what they want to study. And I find that I can go on and on about the welcome messages, but I just find that so interesting. But yeah, I'm not sure, and we often with faculty who do resist, we say, look, we're open, can you come up with something that works better? And that's
Right,
where silence ensues.
right.
And it's kind of funny at Boston University because what I have is we have departments. I know our writing program deals with ePortfolio and has had a very successful assessment program, and others. But I'll often have student faculty, because I'm on various assessment committees. Oh no, I don't want ePortfolio. I don't want ePortfolio. Then it's like a few years later. John, tell me a little bit about that ePortfolio. You
Mhm,
know,
yeah.
um, and I remember I had one faculty member who was like, well, we don't need the portfolio because we keep them all in some file cabinet.
Mhm.
And I'm like, well, does anyone ever look at them? Well, no. Well, I mean, because you're going to make a special trip to go in, whereas online I could just pop right in
Sure.
to any portfolio. So I mean, I, so I think just on a pragmatic level, and just one point to make is that we came up with our assessment of our learning outcomes back in about 2008, and we applied to an educational foundation for funding, and they said this looks terrific, but what's the medium, how are you going to collect all that, or how are you going to do it? And that's when a certain Jeff Yan came up with Digication,
Mhm.
and a match was made.
That's thank you for for bringing that up. Um, Yeah, it's a. I actually I remember it was with Dean, the your previous dean, Linda Wells, and
Linda
she had
Wells. Yeah.
she had some really amazing insights and vision, to
Yeah.
how this could work, and I really deeply respect that. Um, and to a level that even we weren't sure how it was going to work either, but we I think that there were a lot of um, common vision in that it feels like a good fit. And I wanted to point out something that I think that you were talking about, just sort of the convenience, the pragmatic part of being able to pull work from, in a digital sort of database in a repository is much simpler than pulling it out of files, even if it's in digital folders, because they're not tagged with anything. They're
Yeah.
just loose folders. And what are you going to do with, 1,000 word documents in a folder?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I actually think that there is one more thing that that I think also apply at a pragmatic level, depending on how you look at it, which is I think that if you were to, let's say that you go through the resources that it takes, the additional resources it will take to organize thousands of word documents to make them make sense, versus seeing 1,000 portfolios that had already been organized by the students in a very
Right.
authentic and sort of unique ways. Um, and let's say that you've taken the time to do it, but just comparing one to the other, I think
Hmm.
that the end result, meaning that if we were to take exactly the same student body
Hmm. Right.
and take just the Word document, strip off of all
Hmm.
context, and just put it in the folder, and then someone organized it
Hmm.
to make some sense out of them, versus these portfolios that are sort of uniquely choreographed by each
Hmm.
student. I think that two things happen. Number one is, just because the student can authentically sort of make that combination of things in the exact way they want it, and the reflection that glues between the different things and make connections. If you were to, for example, try to assess someone's critical thinking skills, or different kinds of reasoning skills, I
Hmm.
think you're just going to have a better opportunity to to show and prove that the students have achieved those skills.
Hmm.
Um, and so for the exact same body, of work from the same set of
Yeah.
students, I would make this claim, and I don't know, I can't really prove it,
Yeah.
but I would make this claim that that if you go through all of the rigorous, assessment using rubric and whatnot, you will score higher on the people that are using a portfolio, just simply because they gave you more. They gave you their co-curricular stuff. We talk about Sama. They it gives you the fact
Hmm.
that she went and organized a BU TED talk and studied, sort of the life of women in Egypt, by herself,
Right.
right?
Right. Yeah.
It's just something that wouldn't have existed in a Word document, that came from an assignment, because assignment number 6 didn't specifically ask someone to create a TED talk, right? And so I think that, sort of from a, if you're an institution and you're trying to really figure out how your student body is performing,
Right.
you are almost artificially lowering the level of performance by ignoring the amazing achievements that they do, just that they might have achieved them outside of the sequence and the timing of exactly how you have planned it. Do you know what
Right.
I mean?
No, no, I can see that. I think it depends on what method people assessors use. I mean, some people, if you're doing the signature assignment method, where it's going to be
Mm,
one assignment and looked at, then maybe not as much. But I definitely agree with it. What I will tell you is, I feel like I learned so much more about my program
mm,
and students in general. I love when I go in and I see a welcome message and here's the student I'm assessing, okay? And
mm,
then I go through and I don't know, I just feel like I'm gaining so much more. When I started in our program, kind of almost in a sense, the first 10 years before we used ePortfolio, um, I, it's very important in our program. It helps if you learn a lot about what's going on in the other courses. I mean, so you can make substantive connections with those
Mhm.
courses. But you're busy. You're teaching a lot of
Mhm.
students,
Yeah.
trying to get published to keep your job, all kinds of things. You got all these pressures.
Keep your
So,
job.
oh, I'll go to so and so's lecture next week, and I learned about our program, but it was kind of gradual.
Mhm.
But then starting 2009, when I started to get involved in seeing all the student work, and I, I just, it was almost like, I don't know, like, what is it, Matrix, or some of those movies where you take a pill and then you know everything. I felt like I learned so much so quickly,
Mhm.
um, about student work. And again, I don't know about others, but with faculty, we used to always like share our assignments, and a
Uh-huh.
faculty'd give me an assignment, and I'd be
Yeah.
like, okay, this looks really good. Or if I didn't think it looked good, I wouldn't say anything. But
Yeah.
okay, but mostly I work with great colleagues and this exciting work, but I never saw the students' version of it, unless maybe once in a while a faculty member had like one to show off.
Right.
But I learned so much more about what they're after by seeing the student examples. Here's an example, a concrete example of
Mhm.
how a student responds to the assignment. And then you get to think about what worked. I remember one instance where I thought this was a terrific assignment, but there was one part of it I was a little hazy about. And then I read a couple student papers, and they were hazy. That was the part that was their kind of weakest in the paper. It was a great assignment overall, just this one little part. Uh, but see, that's the kind of thing. So I you
Mhm.
know, I think for me, it's been helpful. Again, we Natalie McKnight always says, a faculty member who have some resistance, if you have a better idea, let us know. And so far, we
I love
carry
that.
on as we do.
I love that. And by the way, I I am always impressed by everything that you do, but it would be terrible of me if I didn't mention. And I know that you weren't gonna, toot your own horn too much here, but you have recently also received the College of General Studies Outstanding Service Award at Boston University, which is highly prestigious, and it's something that is awarded to folks like yourself who are selfless about going out and helping other people, creating that community, both at the faculty level and cross departmental and program, sort of across the campus, but also with the students. And I congratulate you for that. I also want to just say that uh, if anything, there's a much further sense of just servicing at the CGS level. I wish I could give you an award, but John, you also have been just a fantastic contributor to the entire sort of ePortfolio scholarship and the community way beyond education, but
Yeah.
sharing it with the world. And so, it's really fascinating. I'm so glad that we got to spend this time together, John. And well, uh, I guess it is time. But I hope that we get to talk again pretty soon. And I hope for continued success with everything that you're doing in the classroom and beyond. And do pop in sometime to say hi, and I'm sure that I'll see you at some conference sometime soon.
Oh, I look forward to it. Thank you so much, Jeff. It was really a pleasure.
All right, take care.
Digication Scholars Conversations is brought to you by Digication, a technology platform powering the most innovative ePortfolio programs in K through 12 and higher education. Our website can be found at digication.com. This episode was produced by Drew Albanesius. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please like, subscribe, and share with a friend. Thanks for watching.